Take three.
Hello, welcome to For Fox's Sake, and this is the Fulham versus Leicester match preview. Hello, Luke. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Very good. I'm looking forward to Steve Cooper's second match in charge of the beautiful Foxes. Welcome to the match preview. Going to be doing this every week. I think we're pretty excited after the last match. Hopefully this game doesn't end up the last time we played Fulham, where I think they basically condemned us to relegation. But that was then, this is now. Let's get on with it. Don't know if you've heard this, Luke, but we are signing a new player. It's Jordan Ayew. What are your initial thoughts about signing Crystal Palace's Jordan Ayew, 32 years old, from Crystal Palace?
Scraping the barrel. They're very uninspiring, and knowing our board are probably going to give him a 3-year deal. Sorry to be so negative, but they don't properly fill me with confidence at the moment. But look, he grafts, and a lot of people at Crystal Palace have a soft spot for him. But if you listen, there's one video that a Crystal Palace fan said a video, Chris's channel, and what he said is any money that we get for him is good business. That's coming from a Crystal Palace fan, and that worries me.
That's interesting. So, I mean, yeah, I think your kind of reaction is pretty much how most of the fans are feeling right now because of his age. And I get that. And I think also on the same day, Ipswich is signing Jack Clark, who's one of the Championship All-Stars, for around 20 million. The fee for Ayew seems to be 5 million up front with 3 million add-ons, probably the 3 million if we stay up. But if you look at his stats, I think if you took age out of it, there are some interesting things here. So first thing I want to draw your attention to is season heat map. So a lot of people thought he might be coming in as a striker. And listen, he could play up front, especially given our current injury crisis. But if you look at where he played most of the time actually on the right wing last season and spent some time out on the left wing. So that's just to get you an idea that he's a versatile player, but he tends to operate more on the wings. I also kind of, bring your attention here to this side of his game: interceptions per game, tackles, and looking at his stats here on the right hand side. So really, this is a guy that knows how to press. And I think that's important because against Spurs, it was a game of two halves, right? And we struggled in the first half. And in the second half, all of a sudden, we were probably the better team in that second half. And the biggest reason why is we got about them and we were physical and we pressed and we turned the ball over. And I think that that's something that this is a player that's going to give that to us. And he'll be able to hit the ground running and give us that immediacy. And if you look at the rest of his stats, he got 4 goals from an XG of about 4. So he finished everything that he was given. And if you look at his assists, he actually got 7 assists of expected 2.5. Now, that is probably a bit of a freak occurrence. What I'm guessing happened is he probably passed the ball to like Michael Elise, who smashed it in from 40 yards or something like that. So it's not really an assist, but still it shows you that he's creative. So I think if you look at him statistically, you've got someone who is going to give you a bit of a goal threat. You can see he's good at making, taking players on, assists. He's not bad at it, and he's going to really press from the front. And I think that is a good squad option. But look, my personal opinion, kind of agreeing with you, is that the worry is with signing him and Bobby Reid. The problem is that what are we going to do? Maybe next season will be okay, but certainly 2 seasons from now, as you get older, your body tends to decline. Even Jamie Vardy, for as good as he is, he can't really play a full 90 every single week like he used to do when he was at his absolute peak. And the problem is that if their physical performance degrades a lot, then you're left with players who are on expensive wages, who can't shift, who might not add anything to the team. So I honestly think that's the real worry. But I have to say, it's interesting you said that. I think Palace, of course, if you can get money for an old player, you will do. But the comments that I saw online, a lot of people were saying that he was a really good player. He's underrated. And he thought it was actually a good signing for Leicester. So let's see. The jury's out on it. I think your opinion is probably more one that the fans will share. But let's see how he performs. I've got a feeling if we stay up, he'll probably be considered a good signing. And if we go down, probably less so. Although I think he might be quite good in the Championship. Let's see what happens. But anyway, this shows the match preview. It's not the Jordan Ayew preview. So let's move on to the big deal. We're at the Craven Cottage for Fulham versus Leicester. They've done well in recent seasons. Before we kind of look at our lineups and how Fulham are going to line up, take a look at the injury list. So currently, Vardy recovered. We thought he was not going to make the last game, and he miraculously started, which is incredible. So that means we're probably still not going to have Connor Cody, although I put 1 month there. He might be back sooner than that. And Daka, I'd be surprised if we saw him this year, to be honest, maybe around Christmas. But I think when he comes back from his injury, he's going to need probably a month just to get back to match fitness. So these two are probably out and probably will be for the next couple of games. Right, just want to kind of give you some of Steve Cooper's comments from his pre-match conference. So he was asked about Oliver Skipp and he said, yep, he's definitely available and we're looking to add more players too. And then, of course, Jordan Ayew turned up. When you bring players in, you want them to be pushing for places. The challenge will be embraced by the guys for starting positions. Everybody who's fit will be under consideration. He's got quite a lot of games under his belt. Now we have a nice variety of midfield options. The Premier League demands a lot of you, sometimes more than one thing in one game. Skippy brings a calming influence and that can support our game. The balance in midfield allows us to pick the right players for the right game plan. And he offers another calming influence in midfield. So I wanted to bring this up because I think this is very interesting and I think it really gives you an indication of why we might have signed him and how we will use him. But what do you make of those comments?
Spot on. Yeah, I definitely think we're going to be able to build out a lot better now as well, particularly if he plays in a double pivot along with Harry Winks in terms of a calming influence. Everything that Ndidi does on the ball can be really good for winning the ball back, but it can be quite frenetic. And I think that's shoulders a lot on Harry Winks and what he has to do to keep, us and having pressing triggers against Ndidi. So having Skipp alongside Harry Winks, I think provides a lot for picking out the right pass and triggers and pressing. So what are your thoughts?
Exactly that. And I feel that we've often said that we'd rather have Ricardo in there instead of Ndidi and put Ndidi higher up the pitch. And I think what Cooper's decided is that he needs the physicality, but he needs someone that can play out. And that's why he signed Skipp, because Skipp is that player, or he sees him as that player going forward, and therefore he can put them in there and trust. But we'll see. I mean, I do think it's good that he says that, like, sometimes more than one thing in one game, meaning that he can change it up a little bit and it gives him options. And I think he is building quite a versatile squad, certainly a lot more versatile than last year. So look, we don't know because we haven't seen Skippy in action yet. I suspect he will at minimum come on in the game against Fulham and he might even start. Let's judge it then and we can monitor this as we keep going forward. But I thought those were interesting comments. And the next one that I just wanted to raise, lesson from the first game. With it being the first game back, there were players making Premier League debuts and club debuts, and maybe that showed in the first half. We allowed them too much of the ball and too much respect. We needed to be braver in the second half. That's on all of us. In the second half, we played with more intent. The lesson is believing ourselves and doing what we can do. A lot of confidence will be taken from the second half. We're really excited about playing again. There's been a really good vibe. It's a fairly positive result, but we want to be winning at home, really. I think it's good he said that. There's been more talk about the first half in the game review, but there's lots to be encouraged by. It's a process of how we improve. What do you make of those comments?
Very, very good. And that really sets the tone early for the rest of the season, potentially, just to be able to say, look what we've done against Tottenham in that second half. We can learn and build from the first half, but look what you're capable of in the second half and be confident about that moving forward.
Exactly, I agree. And I would say that for me, it's almost like in the first half, we're probably going to get relegated, was my thinking. And in the second half, I actually think we could. I'm not saying we will, but we could survive. I think it'll all come down to the points deduction. But to see us being that competitive against such a good team was way more than I was expecting. It was way better than anything we saw in pre-season. And actually, I quite like this blueprint, which we'll come to, which I think is sensible for the Premier League. So let's move on to the lineups. And first here, I've got the lineup that we played against Spurs, which is our 4-2-3-1. I kind of shifted it into two categories. So on the left is how we initially line up, but on the right is how we play when we're in position. So to remind everybody at home, we know that Victor Christensen likes to bomb forward to essentially create an auxiliary left winger. I think he had a very good second half. Actually, the more I looked at it, I don't know if you caught my post-match analysis, but I was actually very impressed with some of his positions. And he did like a really great deep cross from around this position into Vardy that found his man. That was really, really good. So I think he had a strong game. And then Bobby Reid shifts in. So that was the lineup that we had last time. But will we do that lineup again? I think he actually will go for exactly the same lineup just because it had a positive result. But I could also see this. And we just mentioned it, Skipp coming into the team. So I could see Skipp playing next to Winks in a double pivot. And I could see Ndidi being pushed up to the 10 with Buonanotte playing as where Bobby Reid would play. And why do this? So basically, we're dropping Bobby Reid and we're bringing Oliver Skipp into the team, but we're changing the positions around the teams. And the reason why is I wanted to bring this up. So this is just before we got our equaliser. This is in fact what happens. The ball comes down here, goes across, and then Fatah would cross it in for Vardy to equalise. And here's Ndidi really high up the pitch with Christensen. And what I love about this is they're just bullying this Spurs player to win the ball back. It's as simple as that. It's using the physicality, something Luke himself would be proud of. You're the master of these. It wasn't even dark arts. It's just using your body. And we managed to transition it and move it there. So I feel that like Ndidi, people say he's not creative or that good on the ball, but I think you can be creative by winning the ball up high in a pressing physical team. And he offers that. So I could see him being put in the team and kept up there. And then equally, we mentioned about pressing triggers. If Skip was in the team instead, it might make us a bit better at playing out from the back. So that's my opinion of what I think we could see. I'm not sure if we will. And now I see you've got your 11. So talk to me about your 11 and why you think he might go this, or is this how you would go?
I think it could be a combination of the two. I will be highly surprised if Ricardo doesn't feature at all for a second game in a row. I can understand off merit and how everyone played in the last week why he could not feature, but in my opinion, it's crazy, and I'll explain why. Wout Faes, Yannick Vestergaard, both very good and resolute in defence. So if we keep the same back four, might as well got Ricardo in as our right back. Now, I think Ricardo is going to get the better of Iwobi, and I think that's a great matchup, as well as JJ. I don't think I'll see this, to be honest with you, but I would like to see JJ's left back against Traore. Tracks back a lot faster, a bit more physical. I think he would deal with him quite well, and he's going to be feeling confident after playing against Song. Now, we talk about, if we're not going to have as much possession this season, this game I think will be different. But if we're going to be out of possession, the way we set up this back four with Skip and Winks at the back is if we're going to hit people on transition or on a counter, that's the perfect way to build it, in my opinion. Then you have Boyanota acting as your 10. And in my opinion, Mavididi should be back in the team. He made an immediate impact as soon as he came on. Dinked a beautiful cross with excellent vision under pressure to Ndidi for a header. It's a shame it didn't go in. It was a noble effort, but still great vision from Mavididi. And Fatawu is undroppable now in that position. But that could be where IU covers in the future as depth. But anyways, Vardy up front. I could see maybe Vardy being dropped for Mavididi to go up front. But that's kind of what I would like to see, in my opinion, the most effective starting 11 against Fulham. What are your thoughts?
I could see something like this. I think you make a good point about Justin or Christensen against Adama Traore, and we're going to come to that in a moment. Look, I like Mavididi and think he should be in the team, but I think he's being kept, as you say, for the rotation option with Vardy. He clearly doesn't think Cannon's quite at Premier League level right now, which I think is fair enough. And so I think that's the reason why he's not starting, but it's more because he's going to be, as you say, given that it's a quite fast turnaround, it is actually possible Mavididi starts instead of Vardy. I didn't actually consider that, but I think that's not the worst shout in the world that could happen. But yeah, I think our teams are quite similar. And basically, this is the TLDR, is that Bobby Reid, he was okay, but if we look at the ratings here, you can see he was the one that got the lowest rating. I think he was guilty of the move breaking down a bit. I think he certainly improved a lot in that second half. But as you say, I felt that when Casey McAteer came on for him in the second half, Casey had the stronger game in his sort of cameo appearance. But like I say, he might be working on the relationship, so I could still see him start the game. But I think that's why both of us have identified that if there was a player to drop out of the team, based on performances and merit, it would be him. And of course, you mentioned Ricky P. We're a massive fan of him. We'll have to see how it goes there. Yeah, I think what's relevant to that is now let's move on to Fulham and talk about how they're going to line up. So I've taken their lineup here from against their Manchester United on the very first game of this season. And they play a 4-2-3-1. I'll talk a little bit more about them. But I think maybe some of the interesting things in this game, Kenny Tete played at right back, but this could be Timothy Castagna, who I think was still just kind of coming back. Of course, ex-Leicester player, so we know him all too well. You've mentioned Adama Traore, who we're going to give special kind of attention to in just a moment. And Emil Smith-Rowe also played as well, who was one of their big signings that they made. They've got a pretty competent team. I think it's also worth talking about the fact that Fulham have gone absolutely mental this week. I think to be fair to them, we've got to say that last season they sold Mitrovic and they also sold Pelinha this season. So they probably had about 100 million worth of cash that they could spend. But now they started to deploy it. Smith-Rowe cost 30 million. I think Sander Berge, they signed for 25 million from Burnley, I think it was. And then they've re-signed Joachim Andersen from Crystal Palace for 30 million. It's interesting how Palace are selling all their players. I think there's some dodgy stuff going on there right now, which might be good for us. Will these guys play? They might play just because both of them, I think, are Premier League ready and they could slot in right away. So it's maybe something we could see. And both of these guys are pretty physical. They're Scandinavian players. They know what the league's about. So that kind of does throw into chaos a little bit about our predictions. But I think we're going to go for what ended they played last time, given that they were a bit unlucky not to come away with anything because Manchester United got their winner in the 87th minute. So, I put a Spurs challenge, but I mean Fulham. So Fulham, how do they line up and what do they do? So actually, the interesting thing about Fulham is that they're kind of the mid-table team, right? I think they finished 9th last season and they're pretty kind of average on everything. So they're kind of decent amount of goals, decent amount of expected goals, quite a good defense, but everything's around 10th on average, which is kind of funny. But despite that, they do have a very clear system and way that they like to play. So in general, they play 4-2-3-1. They like to build from the back. They have big focus on triangles and rotations. They like to press. And although they're a mid-table team, they try and play an attractive and exciting style. And I think that Marco Silva deserves a lot of praise. It's funny. He was manager of Watford a few seasons ago. Then he got his move to Everton. It didn't work out. And it took him a little bit of time to sort of rediscover his form. He had a bad spell in Portugal, but then he's restored himself at Fulham, won them the title and kept them there for a few seasons at our expense. And I think he has overall done a pretty good job for them. So talking about how they play, something that I've identified by watching some of their videos is that they really like triangles and rotations. So you can see here that 3 players here, their fullback Robinson is pushed up. This was Willian from last season, just the best example I could find on the internet. And this was Tom Kearney. And the 3 of them are forming a triangle. And they like to, draw players in, pass it around to create a free man, and then someone will make a run. And in this case, it was Robinson. And the idea is to draw players out of position to make some space and isolate one-on-one. And you can see here, they've got a triangle on this side. So this is in the game. Here would be a good example of Manchester United versus Fulham. And you can see exactly the same sort of move that they're trying to do. And what happened here is, the ball went into this guy, got played to, I think this is Smith Rowe. And their fullback Robinson made the run down the wing and it got played through the channel to him. So you can see what they're trying to do with the triangles to move the press out of position. And you can see here that although they had this triangle on the left-hand side, if the ball got switched out to the other side, they also have the 3 players here so they can make the triangle on the right-hand side too. So, 4-2-3-1 is not exactly the most sophisticated formation ever known to man, but the way that they use it is pretty clever. And I think that Marco Silva has managed to create a team that can make chances on a fairly regular occurrence just by having clever patterns of play. That's the sort of way that they like to play. Right. Something that you wanted to point out. So I've got a little graph here, but there's definitely something about Fulham because they've signed Bernd Leno from Arsenal a few seasons ago. So talk to me about one of the ways that they like to build.
Kind of similar actually to how we used to build from the back as well, playing it relatively short and straight back and then distribute out wide once you've drawn the player out of position. But they nearly come undone a few times of this in their game against Manchester United. So yes, he made some brilliant saves, but he played him into trouble quite a few times. Now, that's something that's going to be very interesting depending on how much possession we can retain of the football. Because if we can keep them up there at their end, then we could do some damage. But let's wait and see. And what are your thoughts?
Well, exactly. So it's funny because, when you build from the back, it can both create goals, but it can also give some away. And so in this example, what happened is that Calvin Bassey draws out to the left-hand side. He played it back to Leno. Leno played a blind pass here. And that's one of the worst things you can do. You're building from the back is playing it blind. So he's meant to go for the 20 here, but unfortunately he played it a bit wide. And you can see that Man United's 18, I think this is Casemiro, comes running onto it, played it in. And how Man United didn't score, I do not know, but they should have buried this one. And so, they basically gave up a chance. And when I was watching back the highlights, this was on the Fulham channel, and the Fulham commentator was one of those kind of old school sort of a dinosaur almost pundits, and it was like, no, I don't understand why we do this. Why do we play out from the back? One of those sort of types. But look, we do it too. But I think it's something that they like to do, and it can be both good and bad. And I think that goes to show that what is our pressing going to be like. I know we mentioned Jordan Ayew at the top of the show. But what I guess I'm saying is that if we are clever in the way that we do it, we could fashion an opportunity of doing this, especially as the press in the second half last game was effective. And so it might come down to what team starts faster or better and really kind of imprints their kind of style and physicality on the game. And another thing, and you kind of alluded to this before, but they are vulnerable in transition. Because they press up high as well, or they do those triangles, is sometimes when they do those triangles, if you can get the ball off them during that movement, the fullback is pushed right up. And that means that there's holes in behind. And here in this game, you can see that this is Rashford, and the ball got played over the top to him. He got there, and no, Manchester United didn't score. Again, they had a very good opportunity out of it. And then equally, this was early on in the first half. Now, what's interesting here is that maybe 10 seconds before I've stopped the picture, Fulham had a really great opportunity themselves where they almost scored from. But instead, Manchester United get the ball back. And again, because their team had pushed up so high, there was a lot of space in behind. And you can see here, this is, I think, Mason Mount, and he's pointing and he's saying, play it here. There's so much space here. Or you could just play it behind this fullback, and you can see their player here is also about to run onto it. So again, that's fairly common in the Premier League. The Premier League these days has really gone full on Bundesliga. It's really about this kind of almost basketball style end-to-end stuff. Who's going to get caught in transition? And that's something they share. The only thing I would say about both of those aspects is maybe it's equally true for us. Right. I want to talk about some key battles as well in this game, where I think the game could be won or lost. And that you identified it in your team lineup. And it's interesting that you identified it as being such a big concern that you even might not go for Christensen, which I think is fair. So look at Adama Traore here. The guy is an absolute man mountain. He's almost twice as thick wide as Christensen is here. And that's why he's really troublesome. Against Manchester United, he had a really good game. And I don't think it's his fault. I think the rest of the team should have done better. So just before this sequence, he powers down the wing. For Man United, Mazraoui was making his debut, who was signed from Bayern Munich. And Traore had him on toast for most of the game. He cuts it back here, and somehow it didn't go in, but it almost did. And Traore was really showing his sort of power and pace and getting the better of him. And I can certainly remember a few seasons ago when Traore was playing for Wolves, where he really made a meal out of Ben Chilwell, who after that game sort of knew he was in the battle. And I think, to be fair to Chilwell, at the end of that season, he really bulked up and got more muscly. And I'm almost convinced it was that match against Traore that showed him welcome to the Premier League. So can, Christensen deal with it, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think chances are Christensen, I could see him having a game of two halves, as much as I hate saying that. But also, he's probably going to feature regardless of my 11. He's been in probably the most regular period, even in the preseason games. Clearly, Cooper rates him there. So in my opinion, it is going to be that matchup. I think it's going to come down to that first initial battle between the two. And if Christensen gets the better of him, I can see him getting confident. If Traore skips him or megs him or goes past him or anything of that caliber, I can see Christensen losing confidence and possibly losing that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think this will be one of those real ding-dongs that it could go either way throughout the whole game. I think the one concern is because of the way we play, Christensen bombs forward. So that means when we're caught on transition, they're going to probably want to target Traore on that transition. That's the angle I would attack anyway, because especially if he's got the pace advantage, it's unlikely we're going to stop him. What I will say is that might make Wout Faes even more important, because he's going to have to be aware that he might have to step in to cover that on the breaks and watch out for that. But yeah, that's why I've called it a key battle, because I feel whoever wins it is going to help win the war. Right, now talking about Fulham as well, and this is something I found from one of their fan channels, and this was one of their predicted lineups for this season. And what I wanted to identify here is their new number 10, new big money signing, and that is Emile Smith-Rowe. And I think that this is potentially going to be a big part of the key battles too. And I think it'll come down to Ndidi versus Smith-Rowe. So Smith-Rowe is an interesting one, because he was actually playing in the Arsenal first team for quite a while, but he just kept getting horrendous injury problems. And it was one of those where it wasn't necessarily massively long-term ones, but every time he came back, he broke down and he broke down and he broke down. And in the end, he's been replaced by Martin Odegaard, and he was never getting back into the team once Odegaard had signed. He's probably one of the best cams in the Premier League. But he's gone to Fulham, and I think he's already impressed, and he is a good player. And so that's where I think, the battle is going to lie. So just, highlighting him here, this was in a friendly that Fulham played against Sevilla, and he was acting as a box crasher here. So he makes a deep run from in deep, and he actually ends up scoring here on his debut just 7 minutes after he came on at half time. Just makes a great forward run, beats everyone to it, and does a nice composed finish. So I think we've got to watch out for him. Now, that might mean it's not just Ndidi, but it could mean that some of the other players, like our pivot, like Winks, have to keep out for him. But I think that they're going to be using him to build. And if we can beat him and stop him from playing, it's a potential opportunity for us to, again, win the ball off Fulham and, instigate our own game plan. So look, overall match thoughts. I think the big difference is compared to Spurs, we knew that Spurs were going to have way more of the ball. This game, I think, is going to be a much more even game. It might even be 50-50 possession. I think given that it's at home, Fulham might have a bit more, but I think it's going to be way closer. And I think that'll be the case because all stats are probably shots, blocks, all that kind of stuff will be a pretty even thing. And I think that this game is going to be determined by moments of transition. So what I foresee happening is both teams are going to try and build, they're going to try and make something happen. And actually the most threatening either team will look at is when they lose the ball high up the pitch and they get caught on the counter. I think that's where the game's going to go. And it's going to be who's better at pressing and who's better at dealing with the press. I'm expecting from Leicester a way more aggressive start from us. We were clearly way too timid before. And if I'm being honest, it looked like we weren't confident in that first game. And that was the biggest difference. In fact, I would go as far as saying as soon as we scored, it made the team remember that they're actually quite good at football. And they started getting stuck in right away. So I expect to see way more of that. I think the danger of that is that we could press so much more in the first half that we could concede from it as well. But that could also be true of Fulham. But I expect us to be way more aggressive in that. Fulham have a number of new signings that may feature, and that unfamiliarity may help us. It depends. If they put all their new signings in, I think that's always a problem. It's going to take time. Whereas with us, last game we saw that Christensen and Bobby Reed seemed a bit unfamiliar because they'd only just started playing with one another. But the rest of the team, it seemed, that they knew what they were doing. And I think that helped us. I think both teams are going to have chances. And I think what it's probably going to come down to this game is which team has more quality. So put it this way, I could see at the end of the game, it's like Fulham had 8 shots, 6 on target. Leicester had 7 shots, 6 on target. And the score is, I don't know, because it depends on who took their chances. I think that's the way the game's going to go. And I think for that reason, it's very interesting to see what happens in this game because, well, I'm going to give you my prediction. So I'm going for a Desmond. That's 2-2. I think it's going to be a draw. But honestly, I could see it going either way. But I've got a feeling this will be an entertaining game. I think it'll be competitive. And I think both teams will score. And I think both teams might overall be happy for a point if it comes that way. We might even be happy with that, given that it's an away game. And I think it'll be competitive. But how about you? What's your prediction?
My prediction and final thoughts are 3-1 in favour of Leicester. And I think that if you allude back to what you said earlier about Cooper and Skip having a calming influence on the ball, that indicates to me that he's going to want to retain and have a lot more possession of the football, particularly if we can have calmness on the ball. So that's what the biggest takeaway for me is. 3-1 for Leicester. I can see us scoring early, maybe conceding one back and finishing strong, particularly if people like Mavididi are playing people that are confident with a point to prove. He's a lot better at taking his man on than Cordova Reed. I'm feeling a lot more optimistic than I was last week, but will remain to be seen. But look, mate, I think there's a lot of positives to take from this, and I think we can move with the momentum from the Tottenham game.
Totally agree. And like I say, I think regardless of the score, it will come down to the performance again. And I think we'll really get a good idea of where the team is. So Spurs, it was always like anything you can get from that game will be treated as a bonus. This game will be one of those that I think if we got defeated heavily, that would be depressing. If we win, great bonus. I think even a draw would be taken as something. But if it looks like, okay, we're about the same level as Fulham, everyone will be feeling really excited. I think the big fear is that we turn up and we're like, oh man, all of these teams that we used to beat, like your Bournemouths, your Fulhams, your Palaces, they're way better than us. And now we're in big trouble. Let's hope that's not the case. Right, with that, thank you for watching. We'll leave you to it and we'll see you after the game for a post-match reaction. Up the Foxes. Thank you and goodbye.
The Foxes.